Alright, it's been quite a while since my last video, so I decided to start a new series. This is a Zorki 6. It came alongside a Zorki 5 and the accompanying lenses all the way from California, believe it or not. From a nice dude called Don. Hey Don, well, this is the first installment in the series with your cameras. I decided to start with the Zorki 6 just because I don't really have a reason behind it, but I also thought about how to make the series, and my plan is to spend a little more time on the critical bits. Now, one of the critical bits is actually the disassembly, because most of the times when you, I don't know, maybe you look on the internet, you find a tutorial how to or something like that. Most of the times you'll see that after the disassembly, cleaning, whatever, fixing, they say the reassembly is the reverse disassembly, which is obviously correct, but there are a lot of pitfalls, and not paying a lot of attention to the disassembly stage will give you a hard time when reassembling the camera. So hopefully this first episode will be all about the disassembly, what to take note of, how to organize the parts, which is also a very important part of the puzzle. Of course, if you've done 10, 15, 20 cameras of the same model, you don't really need to be super organized, because you will kind of know which part is what, goes where, and so on. The only thing that I still struggle sometimes are the screws. So the screws come in multiple sizes, diameters. There are a lot of screws that have the same diameters and the same pitch, so they will fit different places, but in essence, or being correct about it, or rigorous about it, means that you would have to put back whichever screw came out from whichever hole. Alright, so first thing, before taking a camera apart, at least that's what I do, is I always go through a diagnosis stage. Let's call it a diagnosis stage. So I'm interested in the overall appearance, overall function, visible defects, and so on. For instance, how do the curtains look like? This is the second curtain, because the camera is released. It looks all right. This is the first curtain. It looks all right. Now on the inside, this one looks all right, but maybe a bit stiff. I feel a stiffed zone here, so it's like, I think where it sits rolled on one of the rollers. Most of the Soviet cameras with the original curtains have a line, a shiny line somewhere around here in the middle of the frame. It's totally fine. It's light tight, but I don't know, it's probably the result of the curtain being rolled on something. And this is the second. Now, the first issue was already visible, right? The camera is set to 30th of a second, and the second curtain lags. So testing the shutter from accuracy point of view is totally useless. It's certainly not accurate. If I will take it to B, there's the first one, and there's the second one. It's a very big difference in speed. So all the lubricants inside are super dried out or dried up. The camera looks very nice, it's quite clean. It might have some traces of oil on this lower part of the film spool, or at least it's quite shiny. Maybe it's just the plastics, we'll see. The film rails are nice and smooth. I've seen a lot worse. Light seals are in one piece. This one as well, this one as well. They might not need replacement, but I will do a partial repaint of the camera. So Dan doesn't want a full repaint, which I suggested or offered. He instead only wants a touch up on the black rims. Now I can do this either the cold way, let's say cold way, meaning strip the old paint, reapply a new one and let it cure, air cure, let it air cure. Or I could do it the warm way or the hot way, and that means oven cure. And I will probably go for the second one. That means removing everything, including the light strips, or the light, not shields, Jesus. The felt, actually this is some sort of a yarn in here, and these two felt strips, I will have to remove them gently and hopefully in one piece and then reglue them. It also means that I will have to do a total strip down, so pretty much nothing will remain on the body. You will see the design is a bit different. Usually the Russian cameras are either bottom loaders, so they only have a bottom cap and the body shell is in one piece, or they have that huge back plate that detaches, like in the Zorki 4. This one has a, I think is the only one that has a back door, and that means the shutter is not part of the actual body shell. All right. What else? He also said that the flash doesn't sync as it should, and we'll get to that issue in just a moment. Otherwise it seems to be working. The frame counter works. I don't think it can not work, being a very simple design, and also the self timer is quite vigorous. Alright, so that is fine. What special care one should have when disassembling the camera? This outer ring and this outer ring. Now I have already loosened them up by using my old friction glove and I think a bit of alcohol, so I can now simply unscrew them by hand. One thing that is quite common with these cameras is the fact that this part, which is the actual shallow prism that when you rotate moves the image like this, and it's actually the vertical adjuster for the rangefinder, is actually stuck to this outer rim. Now, being such small pieces, you don't really, you can't really grip them to loosen them up. What I will do, I will just submerge this entire assembly in alcohol, leave it overnight, nothing should happen. Hopefully by tomorrow it will loosen up and separate. Okay, let's start the disassembly and let's be organized. Now, my suggestion, at least in the early stages of, not early stages, but when you are first tackling a new camera, get something like this. So it's simply a tray with a lot of little holes. Now I have another one that is bigger. It doesn't have 32, actually 36 holes. I think it has like 20, but they are bigger and they are usually enough. Unfortunately, it's at the moment a bit occupied with bits from another camera, but this one should be just fine. There are no really massive pieces except maybe the rangefinder unit, the shutter unit and self-timer and stuff like that. Those I can put separate, they are obvious in their aspect. So the tray, a notebook, and each slot in the tray has a number. I will get the number in the notebook and write down what that means, what the components in that number are for, including screws. Having 36 slots available means I can put like 1 or 2 screws in a slot depending on what I'm doing. Alright, let's start with the bottom plate. Usually you start with the top plate, but the bottom plate only has 4 screws, so it's super easy and fast. And I will try some of the bits that I have. These are all adjusted, so I filed down different bits in order to get the best grip with different screws, because the screws are in excellent condition, at least what's visible on the outside, and I wouldn't like to screw them up, if you get the pun. So 1, now, since I will not be fast forwarding this stage, it will probably take some time. If I wouldn't talk and explain stuff, I would probably have it completely stripped down in about 1 hour. We'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll split the video in 2 halves. So, bottom plate, nothing fancy about this. And I will also have to write down the numbers as I go. Alright, and underneath the bottom plate we have the usual flat spring, which is the one responsible for unlocking the shutter, the adjusters for the shutter rollers, and the 2 wires for the flash sync. Now, how does the flash sync work? When this little disc has a pin. Now that pin should come in contact with this little springy contact plate. I don't know how it's called. It also should come in contact with the other one. Let's get the camera. So this is the position with the camera tripped. So the pin is on this side. When you wind the camera, and let's select 1/30, wind it again. When you wind the camera, the pin is here. It's not touching anything. Now, if I hold my finger on this shutter speed selector and I release the camera, I will stop the shutter like this. See, it goes slowly because I'm keeping my finger on that. And that means the little guy spins slowly, so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to give it another go. So it starts here and it goes counterclockwise when you are holding the camera like this. And it goes counterclockwise. It touches the first plate and moves around and touches the second plate. Now this disc is connected to the center shaft. The center shaft is the one that has affixed to it the two rollers that feed the ribbons of the first curtain, and that means then that this will move, it will rotate with the first curtain. Now in order to have the flash sync, you have the two curtains, you load the camera, you wind the camera, and the two curtains, I'll keep my hands like this, the two curtains travel from left to right. So now you have second curtain is this one, first curtain is this one. When you release the camera, first curtain opens, the shutter is open, like in B, and then the second curtain comes and closes the gap. In order to have the flash sync, the flash must be triggered when the first curtain is on this side, the second curtain is still on this side, obviously. Now, there are two contacts there, and there are two flash sync ports here. One is M, one is X. X is electronic flash, the regular flashes that we have nowadays. The M is the old style bulb flash, that, like in the gangster movies from the Roaring 20s, I suppose. Now, since those bulb flashes need a lot of time to actually fire the bulb and create the light, it needs to be fired, the flash needs to be fired before the opening, the total opening of the first curtain. And that is why when you if you were to use that kind of flash, when this pin reaches here, so pretty much the curtain is somewhere around here, let's see, for my curiosity, it goes, see, the first curtain is here, so it hasn't traveled, I don't know, not even half of the distance. So the signal is sent to the flash port, and from there to the bulb. The bulb makes the flash, it takes a while, and by the time the light produced by the flash reaches the subject and is reflected back to the shutter, the first curtain would have already completed its travel. The other contact is for the electronic flash, which is instantaneous, so that must be triggered when the first curtain has already stopped its movement and the second curtain hasn't started the movement yet. So in that very brief time frame when the shutter is completely open, that's why it's at the end of the travel. That also means that this pin should be in contact with the little pad or whatever that is, the contact, when in this position. And if I look, I see a gap of, that's 1 full millimeter there, so it's not triggering. I will have to rebend this little piece of metal in order to get that to touch it and trigger it, and then I will have to check it. And I could use my multimeter to check for continuity when that when the pin reaches that position, but I will order the cheapest Russian flash I can get. It's a rectangular ugly piece of shit that you plug in the wall. It charges and then it flashes, and it would be perfect for this kind of testing. For some reason I don't have, I think I had at least one that I threw away, because who the hell uses that kind of flash anymore? Well, I could have used it, but I don't have one. So I'll order one just to have it for this kind of testing. Don was very specific about the flash not working, so I will need to address this issue and of course test it, because this is my logic speaking, not I didn't read it somewhere precisely. I don't think it can be any other way. All right, so this is the mechanism of the flash sync in a few words. What else do we have here? Well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 screws that are keeping the shutter in position. You'll see the shutter is a bit different in, not the shutter itself, but the design of the shutter crate is a bit different from Zorki 4, Fed 2, Fed 1, Zorki 1, the other cameras that I have presented in my other videos. And you'll also see that 1, 2, 3, these 3 screws are of one type, and this one is of a different type. This is sunken head, so it's triangular in shape and flat. The other ones are not. And this is because in some models, this plate, so this, how's it called? Spring plate. This spring plate is actually straight here. This one has a little cutout. Having a little cutout means you can actually reach the screw and take the whole thing out without messing with the spring plate that is kept in place by these 2 little screws that in turn also keep in place the bottom light shield and its bracket. So this is a lot smarter, and even smarter than this is the design from the Zorki 1, later models of Zorki 1, that no longer used this long spring plate. They used a very small one, triangular in shape, so the light shield and the spring plate were separated, making things a lot easier. All right, let's move to the front. We have this that requires ideally a spanner, a pointed spanner. So this is the button for the self timer, and it's simply a little assembly that can also be disassembled in even smaller bits if you would, for instance, like to repaint the actual button and the outer collar. And to disassemble this part, you would have to take out this little retainer that is very small and very tricky to take out. It's not a circlip, it's almost circular retainer, and then the little button would come out and the spring that keeps it springy. So that is number 2. Underneath it there should be, in this case, a shim. Always check to see if there's one shim or more shims stuck together with all lubricant. This is only one shim. There it goes in number 2. I'll also add to the number 2 this part of the self timer, and I could use a larger bit. This should normally be a regular screw, and you have the screw itself, which if you break, it's gonna be nasty. You have the lever, and you have the little thing, the little cam that connects to the actual mechanism inside. So that is number 2, self timer front, because we'll also have the screws that keep the self-timer in place. Luckily the self-timer works very nicely. I'll probably not even have to clean it in the ultrasound, because that would probably mean that could mean the risk of total disassembly. I will do a total disassembly of a self-timer mechanism, but not today. Not today, not in this series, because that in itself is a 1 hour and 30 minutes job, so I'm not really in the mood just to make a point. If it needed that would be a different thing. Alright, and now we have the lens mount. For the lens mount also the appropriate screwdriver is very important, and you will have 4 screws obviously, and you should have some shims. The last Zorki 6 that I opened had no shims, so that pretty much needs to be addressed, but I have some other plans for that camera in the meantime, and I'll get to what I mean in another video. And guess what? This one doesn't have any shims either. When I take off lens mounts, I usually put a little dot, so black dot goes up. Some mounts have cutouts or various distinct features that you can use to know which way is up and which way is down. If you put it incorrectly, you could get the working distance wrong, because this might be uneven in thickness from one part to the other, and the shims that should have been here are put in such a way that they make, or they give you the same distance from film plane to lens mount, so the working distance. And in case you take it out and don't know which way is which, just take a lens that you know it fits correctly, get it on, alright, and see, the dot was in the wrong place, I think. This is the top of the lens, right, because it has all the markings. Okay, I will put another dot on the back side. Okay, take it off. No, it was on the right side, so, but that's the whole point. Take lens mount, take a known good lens, because some lenses stop at weird positions. Put it on and put the dot on the lens mount according to the top of the lens. Alright, so little screws go to number 3. Now those screws you can't really mistake for anything else. They look like lens mount screws. Okay, what else? At number 4 we have the rangefinder adjuster, and we'll also have this one, which comes out the same way. If you don't have a grippy glove, normally you would need a flexi clamp. So it's a special kind of clamp that clamps on round things. I have a set coming my way. I'll probably get them in like a month, hopefully, and they are designed to unscrew these kind of elements without scratching them. Now you can use that one on this element because it's wide. You can't really use it on this one that is beveled. So for this one I have no idea if my friction glove would have failed to work. That would have been a bit tricky. So for I'll just call it eyepiece, and that's all right. This little Zorki 6 logo, you can take it off, but it's not going to help much except for adjusting the rangefinder. So you have two very stubby and short screws. Don't lose them, they are quite unique. And you have this little insignia of sorts. Now this one is hollow, there's nothing behind it, but behind this one there's a little screw that is the actual horizontal alignment screw for the rangefinder. So since I will have to adjust the rangefinder, I will just leave this bit taken off at number 5. Zorki logo. All right, next is the top plate. Okay, and now things start to get a bit more tricky. On the left side you have this rewind knob, which is super straightforward. So you have one big knob, and you have to poke something here and simply unscrew that knob. Okay, but before unscrewing the knob you also need to take off this top screw that was initially a bit stuck because it's a counter screw, so it tends to get stuck when you try to take this one off. And you have that memo ring, and then you have a pressure plate, a pressure washer that goes points up, okay, and then you have the actual knob. All right, so they go in number 6. Then you have these two screws. And this round disc. Now on the other side of the disc there is a cutout, a funny looking cutout. All you need to do to remember is that the part of the cutout that goes all the way from center to edge is the one that goes on the left, so it's certainly riding on top of this little lever, and this lever is the actual diopter adjuster, and we'll get it out when the top plate comes off. All right, then we need to take off the shutter speed selector. One screw here, one screw here. You can leave the screws partially screwed in the dial itself, so you don't lose them. All right. This part you don't really need to take off unless you are trying to clean it, and I will clean it. So only one screw, and then you have this little spring something of the cold shoe. Okay, nothing else here. And then you have this. Now this is left hand screw, right? So you turn it left to unscrew. You will need something like this. Fit it over the release button, and hopefully, no, it's right hand. Sorry. So it's not like the usual screws. You need to turn it to the right, so clockwise, to unscrew. First couple of turns will actually cock the shutter, and then it should come on. I remember loosening it also. Yeah, well, it's a bit stuck. So what I'm going to do is use some lighter fluid. I think I'm all out of it, and try to loosen it up a bit. Now this knurled part and this part are the same piece, and that means I will have to drip it on the outside of the knurled part, and also a couple of drops or more in between the shutter button and the collar itself, and I will let it soak for a while. Now the video is already 40 minutes long, so I pretty much did nothing in 40 minutes. I'm sorry for that. I will end this part here, continue with the second part when I'm done with this, and we'll talk about a bit the winding mechanism and all the gears you'll see in there. And yeah, Everything else will be probably a bit easier because it will be quite similar to other cameras, but I will go through the whole process because it was Don's wish, and yeah, I would like to fulfill his wish. Alright, see you next time.